was a cheap, dingy little thing. It catered to kids my age. You went around the board, collected cheese, and the first player to reach the end would win. It seemed simple enough, and since it reminded us of Mousetrap, which we didn't have, there were no objections. We popped the movie into the VHS and set up the board. The first part of the video was just a simple explanation of the rules as well as instructions on how the game worked. Then Rap Rat came onto the TV. He was not what any of us had been expecting. My smaller brother, who was only 3 at the time, immediately left the room crying. The rat did not even resemble a rat. The ears were far too big. It had a mouth lined with 2 teeth, the inside of which looked almost swollen. The most striking part about the thing, though, was its eyes. They were large, glassy, and fish-like. I asked, then bothered, then begged my mum to turn it off. Rap Rat suddenly shouted loudly, screaming and wailing, saying, "Wait your turn," in a demonic low-pitched voice that was not at all like his normal obnoxious nasal voice. In the background we could hear the narrator saying, "He's Rap Rat and he's the boss," over and over again in an overly serious tone. The video was indescribable. Images crossed the screen in quick succession, overcut with Rap Rat's expressionless eyes. The images were some things I was afraid of at the time. A person looking over a balcony, a hornet slowly stinging someone's eye, an extreme close-up of a tarantula, a pit full of writhing cobras, and a bloodied syringe filled with green fluid. We immediately turned the video off, and I ran out of the room screaming, slamming the door behind me. It took my mum 20 minutes to convince me that the video was gone, that I would never ever see it again. I had nightmares all week about Rap Rat. That wasn't the last time I saw Rap Rat. While my girlfriend and I were preparing to move in together, I was cleaning out the closet of my room and found it again, with the same VHS and the same board game inside. It was almost perfectly intact, save for a thick layer of cobwebs and dust bunnies on top of it. This was strange. Didn't my mother get rid of it? And what was the game doing in my room? I let out a bit of a gasp when I found it, and my girlfriend came into the room asking what was the matter. Breathing harshly, I said, "Rap Rat." She laughed a bit, asking if it was a joke. I shook my head and explained that it wasn't. She didn't believe me. Nobody did. I decided that the only way to prove it to her was to show her the video. I borrowed my neighbour's VHS and played the video for her. However, the images had changed. I saw a clown, its nose bursting and spraying blood onto the screen. I saw a woman alone in a dark room. I saw a man being forced to pick up white hot metal and hold it in his outstretched hand, turning his hand into a leathery mess. The scratching I heard as a child continued, picking up, getting louder and louder. Then Rap Rat showed up and began twisting and convulsing, its arms thrusting this way and that. The costume wasn't a costume anymore. The felt was real fur. The felt was real fur. Its face wasn't plastic, but instead a bristle of thorns with teeth. The eyes turned inwards and suddenly popped out again. Rap Rat's huge fish eyes were inside out, staring right at me, watching my every move, my every expression. expression. It grinned widely and gestured at my girlfriend and I with a single, outstretched, inhuman hand. I could hear the faintest scratching at my front door. The TV went blank and showed static. The scratching got louder. It wasn't scratching anymore, but thumping. The thumping of tiny feet on wood. My girlfriend embraced me in fear, and my senses kicked in. Before anything else happened, I stopped the video, ejected it, and unplugged the VHS. The scratching stopped. When I looked out the living room window, nothing was there. The police showed up soon after, warning us that a neighbour had seen a figure outside our door and had called in concern. My girlfriend and I simply couldn't explain what had happened and had to tell the police officer that it was us. I was furious that a children's game was terrifying me. I went to pick up the tape, but the VHS burned my hand. It felt like I had touched a Bunsen burner on the highest setting. We had to get the oven mitts from the kitchen in order to take it out, and even then it was scorching hot. I brought it outside, tossed it on the sidewalk, and crushed it with my winter boots. Afterwards, my girlfriend and I had bad dreams every night. We both would wake up in the middle of the night and describe eerily similar things that we saw in our sleep. The scratching would always be there when the lights were off and the room was pitch black, save for the moonlight coming in through the window. Now though, it would happen every time I went near the front door, and every time we said Rat's name. It sounded as if something very small was dragging something across the ground outside the door. Pacing, waiting. I would simply wait myself, with the covers pulled up to my neck until I succumbed to exhaustion. At this point, I was determined to sue the company for damages. The first thing I did was call my mother and ask where she got Rat. She had no idea. I had found a merchant who sold versions of Rat and asked how I could get in touch with the company. He sent me this email. I don't know about the game, but I know it was created by the same people who created Nightmare. The company is called A Couple of Cowboys. Try them. I did a bit more research and discovered that the company became defunct in 1994, only 2 years after they created Rat. I discovered why soon after. How Rat came to be. In 1992, the year of the game's development, A Couple of Cowboys commissioned a manufacturing company in Haiti to create the doll portrayed in the game. The company who created the puppet ran a sweatshop where they forced women and children to produce various components of the puppet, including the felt and plastic of the doll. One day, a young Haitian girl got her arm caught in the industrial sewing machine. The spring loader, unable to handle the weight on the machine, came loose and struck the child's neck, killing her instantly. A few days after the funeral, the mother of the child came to the factory demanding to see the owner, who denied that he had anything to do with it. In a fit of rage, the mother said that the blood from the innocent would seep into every crevice of the doll, every component with which it was created, and that all who touched it would die. She claimed to have summoned a fear demon and screamed at the top of her lungs, "Apparat will curse you." The owner simply laughed and told his corporate bosses about Apparat. They spread the joke from person to person, and the game was renamed Rat, a loose anagram of Apparat. Each recitation of the name Apparat brought with it greater and greater curse. Only 2 years after Rat was created, the company was shut down and the owners hired by Mattel. There were stories of the workers begging for days off, skipping work for weeks and weeks, and finding the puppet in strange places. places. There were also stories of suicides, grim, violent deaths in which the workers would stab at their hands and set themselves on fire, writing "I am fear" on the nearest surfaces in blood. Nobody knows where the Rap doll went after the original creators disappeared. Some say that the last things the victims saw before going insane were large, sunken, fish-like eyes. Words of warning. Number 1. Never ever say Apparat out loud. Saying a demon's name out loud is an invitation to them, a calling. If you have already done this, it cannot be undone. Number 2. Do not try to speak to or contact Apparat. Number 3. Avoid being awake between 3:30 and 4 a.m. when Apparat is the most likely to try to scare you. The audio. The VHS is back. I thought I stomped on it, smashed it to kingdom come, but it's back. I found it in my sock drawer yesterday. This time I was ready. A whole bunch of people have been contacting me, trying to get the tape or some sort of video from the board game. My answer to you is that it's just too dangerous. If I did that, it could very well drive you insane, scare you to death. The video and the game and Raprat itself have some sort of strange power. Raprat follows me everywhere I go. I see little shadows in the corner of my eye, or hear sounds coming from down the hallway when I'm the only one home. If Raprat is there, it will let you know, but it will never let you see it until it's too late, of course. A lot of people have been watching the normal video from the normal board game. That's the thing, Raprat can be normal. It will trick you into thinking it's just a puppet and then stalk you day and night. And that was Raprat, written by Canadian Cowboy. Canadian Cowboy. Okay, the next one is titled 09-17-10 slash, not dash, so a date, 17th of the 9th, 2010. A couple of months ago I began my classes at Chico State University. As I was preparing for my freshman year, I was able to find everything that I needed, except for a laptop. I'm not exactly very good at letting a dollar go for something, especially when I could get that something for less, so I scoured the internet for good deals on laptops, finding none that suited my frugal habits. Classes were only 2 weeks away and I was becoming desperate for a computer. Several days later, I saw an ad in the newspaper for a laptop that was being sold for only $600, and not too far from where I live. It was a very nice Dell laptop too, seeming odd that it was being sold for almost $1,000 less than store prices. I drove to the seller's address the following day. The house was further out of the city, putting up to a dense forest. Outside of the house was an old Chevrolet, and a mess of old signs and other various vintage-looking items. I rang the doorbell, and a thin man in a flannel jacket came to the door. When I asked about the laptop, he looked almost relieved, and told me he was ready to sell it immediately. Luckily, I came with cash in hand, and after proof of good condition, I went home with a new computer. Excited to have my first self-bought laptop, I powered it up and began uploading my own programs and applications onto it. Upon searching the hard drive, I found a folder hidden away on it, which was odd because the man selling it told me that the memory was wiped clean and ready for a fresh start. The folder was titled 09/17/10, presumably a date. I opened it, revealing 6 videos and 3 It was a shot from a shaky camcorder inside of a vehicle, recording a woman walking out of a bar and getting into a car at night. After a couple of seconds, the woman drove off, and almost immediately, the person recording began to drive after her. The video ended after 24 seconds. It almost seemed like the cameraman had been waiting for the woman for a while. Come to think of it, I wasn't too alarmed by this at the time, just a little unsettled. I opened the next video file, titled 002. I assumed that this was the next part of the first video. My assumption was right, as it began with the camera on top of the console, facing out of the windshield. It was raining now, leading me to believe that this was a short while after the first video ended. I could barely make out that the vehicle 2 cars ahead of this one was the same car that the woman at the bar left in. This went on for an unsettling 47 seconds before the camera cut out. I began to get a little nervous, fearing that this might take a turn for the worst. But as if I was watching a television show, I wanted to see where this was headed. Not totally concerned yet, I decided to press on. The third video was, of course, titled 003. This was the one that got me officially concerned. The clip began from the same shaky hands as the first clip. It was now pouring with rain outside of the car, and I could barely make out a figure in a fur coat with an umbrella walking to the front door of a house. I could only assume who this person was and whose house this belonged to. The figure entered the house and closed the door. The following stillness greatly unnerved me. The only thing that could be heard was the sound of rain dumping on top of the car. ominous creep when the camera turned towards the house. It was a completely different house than the one I visited. I was a little relieved by this, though it didn't prove anything. As the fourth video came to an end, I was wondering whether or not I was prepared to see what came next. I could only hope that this was a prank, or at least had a happy ending. 005 began inside the house. It was extremely dark, and the only thing I could make out was a figure that would occasionally walk in front of the camera. It was also quiet for the first few moments, minus the occasional barking of a dog outside. Eventually a small sound could be heard. It soon escalated to a loud, muffled scream. Shaking and struggling noises became more apparent as time went on, as well as crying. A light came on and the camera was lifted and panned to the centre of the room, revealing a beaten and bloody woman tied to a chair. From what I could make out, this was in fact the woman from the bar. The camera zoomed in on her face for what seemed like an eternity before stopping. I couldn't believe that this was happening. My original hope was that this was a movie or something like that had long since diminished. With only one video remaining, I was beginning to fear for my own safety. I locked my door, closed my blinds and pushed onward. I began 006 with a small hope that this woman was still alive and that I could have saved her. The final installment of this horror show began in a bathroom setting. The camera was placed on the counter, facing a mirror in which I could see a door. The only sound I could make out was the familiar one that destroyed my hopes. Power tools. I sat in front of the screen for what felt like hours before the sound stopped. More silence, then heavy footsteps, accompanied by what sounded like something being dragged. The doorknob turned and the door was pushed open. Out of the darkness of the rest of the house appeared a middle-aged woman dressed in what I can only describe as lab attire, sporting a respirator and a pair of long rubber gloves. This, for some strange reason, gave me a small amount of relief. In the reflection, the woman struggled to drag something to the bathtub. As she hoisted it into the tub, I could see that it was a large black garbage bag. I felt like I was dreaming. It was like I was watching a horror movie unfolding on the screen. She lifted the bag up from the tub, now empty, except for whatever entrails that still dropped out. She picked up the camera and placed it on the ground, facing the tub. On the floor in front of it was an assortment of corrosive substances and several other empty containers. The woman began to dump the liquids into the tub, which was followed by an awful, awful noise that I can only describe as pop rocks mixed with coke. The video ended and I was left bewildered and panicked. I finally opened the pictures. The first was a picture of the truck. The second was a picture of a girl tied up before she was beaten. And the third brought up the corrupted file notice, but maybe that's a good thing. I managed to keep the two pictures before I handed the laptop over to the police. I was reimbursed my $600 along with a bonus. Apparently the victim was the young girlfriend of the older woman's ex-husband. The older woman was arrested almost a year before, but was cleared of all charges due to lack of evidence, and the ex-husband was incarcerated instead. I guess this was the missing link. I hope this has solved any unanswered questions. Although I'm not sure who the man in the flannel jacket was, or how he got a hold of the laptop, or how he owns the same truck as the murderer. I guess I'll just leave that to the police. And that one was written by Bong Water Snowman. Bong Water Snowman. Now we have the last Once he started to get to know the other residents and learn about all of the activities that went on at the home, he felt a bit better about being there. After Grandpa moved in, I would visit him every Sunday and join in the weekly game challenge. The game changed depending on the week. Sometimes it was gin rummy, other times it was shuffleboard, sometimes it was bingo. The games were chosen ahead of time by residents from a list that had all of the available games written on it. When the game was decided upon, the entire hall would be converted into an arena for the game of choice. This week, the residents had chosen to play backgammon, admittedly not one of my favourites. After we played a few rounds of the weekly game, Grandpa and I would get some lunch from the retirement home dining hall and then head back to his room so he could tell me one of his favourite stories. Grandpa had all sorts of stories about gnomes, fairies, giants, and other supernatural creatures. He even told me about the urban legends like the alligators living under the sewer he had heard while growing up in New Jersey. It was always great fun hearing Grandpa's stories, and I always looked forward to hearing a new one every week. The years passed and I entered high school. I didn't stop by to visit Grandpa as often anymore because I became busy with hanging out with friends, doing homework, and starting to date girls for the first time. Even though I didn't have the same amount of free time as when I was younger, I would still try to visit Grandpa as often as I could and join in on the Sunday games. I would have lunch with Grandpa and listen to one of his tall tales when we went back to his room. I was older, but I still loved listening to his stories. It seemed like he would never run out of subjects to talk about. He even told me about his experience as a pilot in World War II. It was always great fun listening to the trouble he got in as a pilot, flying under billboards to see how low he could make his personal plane that he bought after the war. Finally, it came for me to go off to college. I would not be back for a while, so I wanted to spend a lot of time with Grandpa before I left. I noticed that his health had taken a turn for the worse, but he never brought it up. I never brought it up either because I didn't like to think about the fact that Grandpa's health was fading. I visited him like usual up until the last day I had free before the start of the new semester. This would turn out to be a visit that I would never forget. We had our usual schedule: play a game, chat over lunch about all of the new things in both our lives, and go back to his room for a cup of coffee, butterscotch cookies, and one of his tales. We sat at the table next to one another, dunking our cookies into the hot coffee and eating them one by one. Today, Grandpa seemed more introverted than usual. He hadn't really said much over lunch either. I figured that this was because he was having one of his bad days, or the days when his bones ached and he had a hard time getting around. However, I didn't think of this anymore when I saw Grandpa promptly stop eating the cookies in front of him and give me the most serious look I have ever seen him give in his life. I put down my cookies as well and listened for whatever it was Grandpa was about to tell me. He cleared his throat and in a grey tone said, "You are older now, Thomas. You are about to go off to university and experience a whole new chapter in your life. That is why today I have to give you some advice." I smiled and urged for him to go on. Grandpa nodded and continued where he left off. "You are the first person I am telling this story to. I told myself I would only tell my most devoted grandchild the story, in the hopes that they would not make the same mistakes I did in life. And you must promise me that you will only tell this story to your most devoted grandchild, so that every generation is given a fair warning." Grandpa paused and made this he paused when he saw my expression changed a bit. After patting my shoulder for a moment, he went on. Yes, I miss her too. I always loved her dearly. It is at my old age that I've had a lot of time to reflect on my past actions. I wish that when we were married I could have treated her better. If I had treated her better, maybe she wouldn't have turned out like that. I was taken aback by his statement. What do you mean? Grandpa sighed. This is what I want to talk to you about. Some advice I want to offer for you as you head off into the world and want to make a life for yourself. You see, your grandmother and I got married in the 50s. In those times, men were the king of the house, and their wives had to attend to their every need. I'm not saying that it was right. It's just the way that things were back then. I was the same as most of you men in that era. I was fresh out of my military service from World War II and had just settled down with your grandmother. We bought a cheap house under a government program to encourage home ownership, and I got a job working at an office. Unfortunately, like most men of that era, I was always very hard on your grandmother, who, like most women of that era, stayed at home. I always demanded the best from her, the best housework, the best meals, the best hosting when we had the neighbours over. I insisted that she always dress up, wear makeup, and put on her fine jewellery when managing the house. No wife of mine was going to be a slob and get me mocked by the neighbours. Looking back now, I realised how silly I was to demand all of that from her. But I suppose we were both victims of the culture of that time. I think my strictness got to your grandmother at times because there were occasions where I would see her weeping to herself as she made dinner in the kitchen. When she was like that, I would leave her alone. I had tried to suggest that she watch one of her shows on the Women's Network or listen to a cooking show on the radio, but my suggestions always just made her more upset. So I learned to give her the space when she was in one of her moods. However, one night, she was so upset that she burned our meal. Even after burning it, she still served it in both of our dishes at the table and sat down to eat her own portion, still weeping as she shoveled the burned pieces into her mouth. This was unacceptable to me. I chastised her for what she had done and told her to go back in the kitchen and make a new dinner for us both. I told her that if she couldn't get herself together to simply make me a sandwich, that ought to calm her down a bit. It was then that something changed in her. Her tears suddenly stopped and a small smile crept over her face. She laughed a bit and I laughed along too. The whole situation was a bit comical. I apologised for being strict and she shook the whole thing off. She brought the dishes back to the kitchen and set forth to making a second meal, which when she served for the second time was up to the usual quality of her cooking. After that incident, your grandmother didn't cry again. She went about happily doing the housework and preparing the meals. When she was chastised, she would just smile and say she'd do better. She was the model housewife. It was around that time that one of my good friends, Jerry, went missing. Your grandmother knew his wife, Edith, and together they got all of the housewives involved in trying to find him. They put up flyers and the like, but unfortunately, Jerry was not seen again. It was a few months later when another one of my friends, Stan, went missing. The housewives got together again and tried to find him with little success. After that, the excitement died down. Although the men were not found, no one else went missing from the neighbourhood. It became somewhat of a local mystery. None of the men had a reason to go missing. They both worked at the same office that I did, and they both had a stable home life. Even to this day, the neighbourhood is still talking about the circumstances surrounding their disappearances. The incident did bring the community closer together. The housewives ended up forming their own club, which became a national sorority. It was was open for many years, and during that time donated a lot of the time helping less fortunate people in the community. I was one of the people who always wondered what happened to Jerry and Stan. They were good friends, and I was always sad to lose them. It was when your grandmother's health was failing many years later that we got to talking about my old-time friends. Here, my grandfather paused as if the subject was hard to talk about, but when he saw my concerned expression, he continued on. Don't worry about me, lad. I'll be okay. Now, where was I? Oh yes, many years later, your grandmother and I were talking about Jerry and Stan, and that is when she brought up all of the great things she cooked while we were looking for them. The mouth-watering roast she had prepared and fed to all the members of the search party. The roast beef sandwiches she had packed for the lunches I took to the office. The blood pudding she had made for the neighbours. She went on like this, naming off all the different meats she had cured and served to people over the years. I recalled all of her meals with warmth, but was a bit confused as to why she would have brought it up when I was talking about my old friends. And that is when the smile came over her face, that same smile that had come over her face at the dinner table those many years ago. An unsettling kind of grin that seemed to reach in and tug at my very soul. They've already been cooked, dear, she said in a crackling, uneven tone. I felt myself retch a bit at the thought of consuming the terrible thing that I had. Your grandmother just chuckled and continued on. I cooked them along with all the people you complained about at your job. Remember how you complained about Stan and Jerry getting promoted before you? I took care of that, did I? I made sure the supervisors who were bullying you moved away. Of course, they didn't really go anywhere other than my cooking pot. I always made sure to cook a perfect meal out of all the naysayers just for you. Grandpa stopped his tail to retch a bit, and I stared at him with my mouth open. I could feel the gore draining from my face. At this point, I was visibly shaking. When he got a hold of himself, he continued on. Shortly after your grandmother told me that, she passed peacefully in her sleep. That same creepy smile was painted on her lips when I found her. After her funeral came and went, her last words haunted me. I wanted to know more. I started reading through her old journals, and I learned that the women's club she had formed, the Jersey White Hat Club, had a very dark practice that they put into place. Should any man give them a hard time, it was not above them to punish him in any way possible. They outlined all of the ways they could punish their significant others, boyfriends, or other troublesome men in their lives. There were a recipe for poisons, instructions on how to psychologically torture people. There were so many dark things I read in those journals that I don't even want to repeat them. But one of their most twisted games was taking a friend of the troublesome men in their lives and serving it to them in the form of food. They had all sorts of recipes about cooking and preparing human beings. Those journals were just some of the most horrible things that I have ever read in my life. I would have burned them all if I didn't have to turn them into the police station for evidence. That's what I did instead. The police read the journals over and over in complete disbelief. I gave them the journals with the specific conditions of keeping my family out of the media and the investigations. I told them that was the only way I would hand over the evidence. Since I knew the head of the local police station, he pulled some strings and focused much of the investigation on the living members of the sorority, like your grandmother's best friend Edith. They investigated the local Jersey White Hat Club and brought in all of the current members for questioning. Our family sat on the sidelines watching the whole thing in disbelief. As you know, Edith had been one of our close family friends for years. shocked that she was actually a member of such a dark cult. If they knew everything that I do about your grandmother, they would have been even more horrified. Fortunately, that was not a truth that any of them had to bear. Later, the police found out that every chapter of the sorority across the United States was still practicing the dark rituals written in your grandmother's journals. They were able to successfully shut down the sorority 2 years ago after being active for all those years. But I heard recently a new club started up under a different name. This is the advice I want to give you. If you meet a girl wearing a white opal stone shaped like a moon on her left ring finger, under no circumstances have any relationship with her. Report her and whatever club she is affiliated to with the police. That is their secret calling card. And just to be safe. Here, Grandpa paused to take a drink of a glass of orange juice beside his coffee to calm his nerves, and then continued on. Never, I repeat, never mock a girl by asking her to make you a sandwich. Don't demand anything from her. Treat her equal. Let her do as she pleases. If I had just learned to be kinder to your grandmother all of those years ago, I wouldn't have created the monster that she became. Be kind to the ladies in your life, grandson. The consequences for doing otherwise are dire. And with this, Grandpa fell quiet. His hands were wrapped around the glass with orange juice for support, but they were visibly shaking. I was shaking too. All of this was too much to take in. I could only sit there staring at my grandfather in silence. Every time words came to my mouth, they quickly left me. The two of us didn't talk for the rest of our visit. I simply got up from the table and walked to my car without another word when it was time to leave. The words of my grandfather's story echoed throughout my thoughts on the long drive home. 4 years after my visit, and shortly after I received my bachelor's degree, my grandfather passed away. I attended the funeral in late spring. The whole family was there. My mother, my father, his 2 brothers, my cousins, my sister, and her husband. Of course, the more obscure family members were there too, like my grandfather's sisters, the cousins 3 or 4 times removed, and other assorted relatives. Your standard fare for the typical family gatherings. It was an open casket funeral, so the family could come up and look at him lying peacefully in his new home. I came up and paid my respects. I silently promised my grandfather that I wouldn't tell what I knew to anyone in our family, and thanked him for all the good times we shared. It was then that one of the female cousins came up to me and paid her respects to Grandpa too. She tried to lighten the mood a bit by teasing me about finding a girlfriend. I told her I was in no hurry to find one, and she rolled her eyes. As she went to talk to other family members, I got the sight of something white on her finger. My heart started beating loudly in my chest at the sight of it. It was an opal stone cut in the shape of a moon. She wore it on her left ring finger. My eyes shot around the rest of the room. My aunt wore the ring. My female cousins wore the ring. My grandfather's sisters wore it as well. Even my mother wore it. My head started spinning as I realized that all the female members of the family wore the same ring. I felt my heart pounding louder and louder in my chest. My grandfather made a big mistake not getting our family involved in the investigation. This thought washed over me as I saw more family members enter the funeral house wearing that infamous ring, and the walls felt